the most important thing we learned in OTAs is that more this week on the couch. Marcus Mosher just wrote this up for 33rd team. It's the most important thing we learned in OTAs.
I think we learned a lot, but the one thing that makes me the most concerned, Sig, is that Joe Burrow still isn't 100% healthy. Now, usually I kind of throw away all the positive news that we get from OTAs because everybody's in the best shape of their lives.
Right.
Everybody's going to have a breakout season. But what I've kind of learned over the last couple of years, it's generally the negative reports from OTAs and mini camps that end up kind of coming to fruition when we get to the season, whether it's like, hey, Trey Lance's accuracy is still way off, or Quentin Johnston still isn't learning the offense. I'm getting concerned about Joe Burrow. He had a OTA practice last week where he was scheduled to throw in front of the media, didn't come out. That had a big. Everybody panicked on Twitter. Zach Taylor said, "Ah, that's my fault. I messed up. He'll throw tomorrow." He didn't throw tomorrow.
Oh,
Yeah, and now it seems like the Bengals are going to be overly cautious with Joe Burrow, and that has me concerned, especially in my best ball drafts when Jamar Chase is going at number 5. Like, how healthy is Joe Burrow actually?
mhm.
Are they going to have to manage him throughout the season? Are they going to be more cautious to pull him if he doesn't look 100% healthy? I'm getting a little concerned saying that we'll never see the 2021, 2022 version of Joe Burrow again.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's possible. How did he have the wrist? The actual season-ending injury last year was like someone landed on him, right? It was like the way he was
Yeah, and
landed
then
on.
and then he threw the 2-point conversion in the Baltimore game, and that's when it tore off the bone or whatever it was.
Right, right. And you just wonder if the gods are being cruel because we have in Joe Burrow the absolute heart, spirit, aura of a champion. No, there's just no doubt about it. But his physiology might not be up to the task. That's the worry, right? That's part of the reason why we're like old school football guy mentality about small quarterbacks. It's not just small in terms of height. It's how they're built. That's one of the things about Bryce Young, I think, that caught people off guard with if they weren't watching him, in a different setting now in the NFL. Wow, he looks kind of slight. That's what worries people a little bit about Jayden Daniels' build too, in addition to his inability to, practice self-preservation. But there's worries, and at least Jake Browning was functional at times, even
Competent.
kind of fun. Yeah, I mean, he has a future as a bridge starter if he keeps this up. And you could turn that into a nice contract with one good year as a bridge starter. Ask a lot of different quarterbacks. But just taking a step back because we are catering to a fantasy audience here. It does make every Cincinnati Bengal as fragile as Joe Burrow is. If you don't think Joe Burrow is that fragile, then they're not that fragile. But go ahead.
And that's what I'm figuring out when I'm doing these summer drafts is every time I'm on the clock, I'm hoping, that Jamar Chase goes a pick ahead of me or
Yeah,
T Higgins goes a couple
right.
spots ahead of me. Even though I really like those players, Burrow's health, and now it's not just 1 year, it's multiple years now of him having some big injury that he's coming off of, makes me a little concerned. So we'll see. Maybe this will get better as we get closer to the training camp and we have more eyeballs on him. But coming out of OTAs, I think I'm more concerned than I was earlier in the offseason.
Yeah. With the concern being, and I think you laid it out well, and there's a bunch of things to tease out of what you said just leading up to that. One is negative OTA news might be on pound for pound more meaningful than positive OTA news. And we've even got it, like you said, sorted out into categories. He's got on a new diet. He dropped this much body fat, best shape of his life, breakout season coming. Running backs learning to play in the slot. Other roles that teams are devising for them. But there are also types of OTA news that doesn't necessarily fall into positive or negative. And I want to pause and shine the spotlight for a second on something you said, that the issue wasn't that Joe Burrow was missing practices. Because we could talk about Deshaun Watson right now.
Hmm.
I don't think there was anything like that with Deshaun Watson, right? I mean, as far as we know, everything that
No,
happened in Cleveland OTAs was what was supposed to happen.
schedule.
So, right. So we're trusting the team and we're saying, hey, they're going to scale them up at the right pace. And hey, not every medical staff. This is one of those things I think that it's almost taboo to talk about because Michael Thomas brought it up in connection with Ryan Ramchick and himself about, again, I'm going to get myself in trouble because New Orleans is kind of run by like one health system. There's a
Mhm.
competing health system, and they're the ones that also run everything for the Saints. And the Michael Thomas came out when Ryan Ramczyk was. I mean, I don't even know if Ryan Ramczyk's going to play again. That he had, he's not looking good for this year. It's why the Saints took a tackle in the first round. Um, that for every injury, no matter what your injury is, they give everybody the same rehab packet, like
Mm,
this, like the same instructions, which kind of sounds like the healthcare quality of healthcare you get from this healthcare system. If you're a patient, they're just you're surprised that they're also doling that out for the players too. So sometimes we are, you know, certain medical staffs we've learned to not necessarily trust to oversee these rehabs, but in so much as we trust the organization, if it's proceeding along the schedule, we're fine. It's whenever we are set up to an expectation of a player's going to be at this point, and then we actually find out, well, he's not. Well, we don't even know. And like you said, even the reticence about it is it's it's what he's not saying that's bothersome. But there's a kind of OTA news. It's not quite positive or negative. And you mentioned this in the 33rd team article when you brought up the Eagles. It's new coordinators, or new head coaches, where we have a new, especially on the offensive side of the ball for fantasy football, we're watching. And maybe because they're installs, right? Some people might say, well, it's not really real football. So what are you going to learn about? Oh, so of course, a player like Braylon Allen looks good, and he's
right.
supposed to look good, right? Guys with the physical traits are supposed to look good in that setting. But if you're watching it more a qualitative way and saying, well, this is for install, so actually we're going to learn a lot about the plans for these new offensive coordinators. Kellen Moore, and there's a whole other thing about retread offensive coordinators. I'm looking at the teams that hired the players, the coordinators that were failure, like Alex Van
Mm,
Pelt,
mm.
Ken Dorsey. What are you doing hiring guys that were failures at their last stop? But whatever, maybe there's a problem with fit or something. Kellen Moore, the Eagles. What did we learn about that in OTAs?
Yeah, so Jalen Hurts came right out and said that this is 95% new. Like basically the offense is entirely new. I got to believe that the 5% they're probably keeping is like all the short yardage plays, the tush push, but everything else is going to be new. And I've got some concerns about that. I think
Right.
Kellen Moore can be a good offensive coordinator. We saw that with his time in Dallas, but now I wonder the further that we get away from Kellen Moore as an offensive coordinator in Dallas, how much of it was Mike McCarthy and Dak Prescott versus Kellen Moore being a good offensive coordinator. Clearly didn't work out with the Chargers. I, I think this offense is going to fit everybody well, except for maybe Jalen Hurts. I'm not sure Jalen Hurts is a Kellen Moore style of quarterback where you have to throw in tight windows. You have to throw with anticipation, and it's not a lot of backyard football and simple reads. I'm very curious to see what it looks like because it's entirely new, and I know for a lot of people that's exciting that it could be better, but it also could be worse. And I think that's my fear here with Philly.
And I'm learning, I really used this a lot last year, Marcus, that maybe, and you should be excited. Look, there are offenses where you should be excited simply because of the dead cat bounce plus,
Mhm.
right? So if we're coming like Matt Canada's, like the post Matt Canada Steelers, ironically, the post Arthur Smith, it's not the post Arthur Smith Falcons, it's the post Desmond Ritter Falcons, right?
Correct.
Which goes back to what you're saying, by the way. I do think it's interesting as we're throwing out all our hot takes and watching everything and reacting to everything in real time, how both Dallas and Seattle, we all had our conception of why things were happening they were the way they were in the offenses in Dallas and Seattle. And it sure seems like we're learning that maybe we had it wrong. And like you mentioned about Kellen Moore, and part of the reason, just to go back to touch on what you said, is that I've said this like 15 times on the show because I want to say it out loud because I was one of the biggest skeptics. The best bye week offensive adjustments were made by Brian Schottenheimer and Mike McCarthy.
It's
Even they
crazy,
just
isn't it?
it
That they
is.
actually figured it out,
They actually figured it out
and it's as simple as, hey, maybe we should throw the ball to CeeDee Lamb more than what we've been
a
doing.
lot,
And then all of a
a
sudden
whole
the
bunch.
offense took off. Here's my thing with Kellen Moore. I think Kellen Moore has a really good collection of plays, and they're really good to post on Twitter. People get really excited about all the different types of plays that he can run. There's quite a few cool trick plays in there, but it doesn't feel like an offense that builds off a play. You know how Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers
Mm.
will run a play early in the first quarter, even if it doesn't have any success, because it's setting something up in the third and fourth quarter that they're going to run in a key situation. That was never really the case with Kellen Moore. It was basically like, hey, these are my 11 or 12 really cool plays. And then after we get through them, that's when it becomes an issue. So has he learned and advanced since being kind of let go by the Cowboys and being fired from the Chargers? I
Mhm.
hope so because he's incredibly bright. He's had success as an OC before, but it doesn't come without concerns.
Yeah, you laid that out so well. You laid that out well, and what I really wanna magnify here is a concept. I love the way you use the phrase collection of plays. And there's there's layers for an offensive coordinator, right? There's your scheme. I suppose your scheme is at a high level of philosophy of football. And then, like you said, there's your playbook, there's your collection of plays. Can you design a play that both works and also makes sense to everybody that has to execute it so they can execute it? And then there's another layer, maybe where the front office comes in and scouts. Like, can you get the players that are the right players to do those roles that you're asking for in that play? But by far, and I guess we can make a divergence here between an offensive coordinator and a play caller, because this is more of a play caller thing.
Mhm.
Like you said, it's play sequencing, or even to another layer. It's I love racquetball. I don't know if I've done my racquetball soliloquy, my racquetball ode to racquetball, because I'm getting to play again at the New Orleans Athletic Club, which I could also do like a whole hour on the New Orleans Athletic. It's like the athletic club at the hotel at The Shining,
Nice.
basically. It's awesome. It's so awesome to get
Is
to
that a
go
good
there.
or bad thing?
It's a great thing.
Okay.
It's like a dream. And I love racquetball. I'm lazy. I don't like to exercise. My body is kind of like, there's a joke about professors that their body just is there to get their brain from like class to class, and that's kind of how my body has been. But I love playing racquetball, and my wife, the love of my life, Kate, like she loves it. She's a super competitive, like so she's really digging in, and she's building up her game to where like she's formidable now. And
Mhm.
now she's gotten to the layer where like we're really foes, like we're going back and forth in rallies, and like wow, there's a whole other layer to this game when you're engaging with another human brain, right? I mean, games
Right.
are fun, like darts or pool or golf, but now imagine that the feet on the other side of that equation is another human consciousness. Now we're just open ended, and all kinds of things can happen. And that's the part of play sequencing and play calling. Like you said, Kyle Shanahan gets that. I mean, and some of it's not genius stuff. Some of it is just like basic. Like if something works, keep doing it. you know,
Right.
just super basic stuff. And from a game planning, that's another layer of the offensive coordinator. The game planning perspective is let's try to, if possible, play to our strengths, but we should definitely play to the other team's weaknesses. Like we should try to expose their weaknesses even more than playing to our strengths, because playing to your strengths is kind of predictable. So go ahead. You
I was
you
gonna say
want
it's it,
you interject?
it's yeah, it's not that dissimilar from chess where you're setting up a move to make another move to eventually make the final move, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what it takes to become, one of the top 5 play callers in the league. And I'm just not sure Kellen Moore is there yet.
Right.
I think he's always thinking about the next move. And a lot of times when you get into these big games or critical moments in the game, there's not a base for him to kind of go back to and say, "Hey, this is what we really do well. This is what we did in the first quarter, and this is how they reacted to it."
Right.
He's a young. I mean, he's really only been a coach in the NFL for 5 or 6 years, and I know that seems like a long time for how long some of these guys get a chance to do it, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not that long in terms of the experience of, hey, this is what this defense is going to do after I call this play and this play and this play. There's a lot of pressure on Philly to get this right. And it
Mm-hmm.
seems like Nick Sirianni is giving the offense to Kellen Moore.
Right.
I think in terms of yardage and points, the Eagles will be fine. But I am curious to see when it gets to those big time moments, how this offense reacts.
Right. And that's where the play calling gets magnified, the importance of it, because like you said, and like we've been talking about, you brought up chess. I mean, it's not just knowing your team or even knowing the other team. It's understanding the other human consciousness that you're opposing, and like what they're going to anticipate or how they're going to react. And like you said, you already have some data on how they react, and you can use that. Baseball pitchers. I mean, this is like one of the back in Greg Maddux, right? Like back in they would say they say that Greg Maddux would like groove some pitches in spring training to the best hitters and let them hit home runs off of
Mm.
him. so that it would affect their psychology. And of course, there's the famous story about Kirk Gibson, the Kirk Gibson home run, the Dodgers
Hmm.
'88. It's probably, it was electrifying to say the least. And I mean, I'm still amazed that happened. That like that story actually even happened. Like he was in the locker room, he could barely even stand. They were saving him for that moment. And he said that like one of the scouts in spring training said if you ever have a 3-2 count against Dennis Eckersley, he's gonna throw you a backdoor slider. And I guess like, he like fouled the ball off and he like stepped out and like that scout kind of came to him and said, I forget the scout's name, came back to him in that moment and said, look for a backdoor slider. And he just looked for a backdoor slider and the rest is, as they say, history. But it's anticipating and understanding how they're going to react. And I mean, that's a part I think, and you want to talk about fun for fantasy football or DFS or prop bets and things like that. Um, we've barely even scratched the surface of that. Trying to understand play callers and understand like where play callers are going to have trouble. Like this was like Sean McVay and Bill Belichick in the Super Bowl. I thought was a
Yeah.
terrific example of being able to say like, hey, like you said, youth is great, youthfulness, new ideas, innovation. That's great, but when it comes to that, you know, slow fight there is in play calling, the jujitsu, like dirty, grimy fighting on the ground in play calling, Bill Belichick and that experience of age, that's also worth something in those big moments. Talk about Dallas real quick. Brandon Cooks, he's been a big OTA. I think John Machota, if I'm saying his last name right, said,
Hmm.
hey, this looks like a connection, a real connection. Are you buying it?
I am. For the main reason that Dak loves Brandon Cooks. And that's a lot of what goes into who plays is how much does the quarterback trust a receiver? And Dak really trusts Brandon Cooks. If you look at the second half of the season, Brandon Cooks played really well. The touchdowns went up, the yardage per game went way up. They've worked out a ton this offseason. And I also think there's part of it that nobody else on this roster has taken a big step up to challenge him. I know Jalen Tolbert's had a nice offseason. He's projected as the number 3 receiver, but everybody that's been at OTAs and mini camps has commented on Brandon Cooks looks even faster this year. He's more confident in the offense. He knows his role. This is his second year in Mike McCarthy's offense. He doesn't have to think about what route he's running. I don't know how much value that will have as a fantasy player,
Mm-hmm.
but I do think that's going to make this Cowboys passing attack even more dangerous if there is another reliable outside receiver to pair with CeeDee Lamb and to pair with Jake Ferguson.
Yeah, and Ferguson's good. Ferguson's underrated, I
Yeah.
think, because Luke Schoonmaker. Again, negative news out of OTAs. Luke Schoonmaker's hurt again, and that means, I mean, Jake Ferguson's pretty good, actually. I wonder if they had seen what Jake Ferguson did last year before drafting Schoonmaker, that they might have gone a different direction in the second round and said,
Well,
we're go ahead.
they were considering drafting a tight end in round 1 last year. Like that's how not little they thought of Jake Ferguson, but how much of an unknown the tight end position was after Dalton Schultz left. They really liked Sam Laporta. Dalton Kincaid was a player they were considering
Mm-hmm.
before Buffalo traded up. They were hoping to cobble together a tight end room with Scooney and Ferguson and Peyton Hendershot. And then they just got to the training camp, and it was so clear that Ferguson was the best option. Again, this is somebody who
Right.
has trained with Dak all offseason. He's gone to Dak's house and stayed overnight multiple days. And I know gets into a little bit of like, how much does this matter? Does this, hanging out as teammates and friends or whatever? But Ferguson caught 3 touchdowns in the playoff game. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be surprised, Sig, if we get through the 2024 season and Ferguson is the player that leads the Cowboys in red zone targets and end zone
Right.
targets.
Right. Right. This is another one of those things. What I do a lot when it's the off season, and other than OTA news, it's a slow time, which is good. Is I like to look at ADP as a whole. Like I look at the entire team's ADP, and then I work backwards from that and think, well, what does this mean the fantasy football conventional wisdom is saying about this offense? Or what are they factoring in or not factoring in? Or they're factoring it in over here, but not over here. One of the things I just saw is that all 3 of the Chiefs wide receivers are up. How does that work? And Kelsey's not down. So I guess there's a different faction of the fantasy football hive mind that's in on Rice and Brown and Worthy, and they're driving up the price of all 3. But it would make sense if one's going up or 2 are going up, then one would
Which
be
one are
going
you in on,
down.
right? By the way, which one are
Oh,
you
it's
in right now?
Brown. It's Brown.
Yeah.
It's Brown because, first of all, like you said, who was sitting next to him at the game? He was sitting next to him courtside. All right. And also, Xavier Worthy is hurt. And negative news out of OTAs. Gosh, how many different rookie wide
Mhm.
receivers had hamstring issues, the check engine light, where, and sometimes, there are Odell Beckhams, there are guys that it doesn't matter. They can show up in week 4 as a rookie and take the league by storm. But that time is important time. And I think Marquise Brown is better than people think. I just think that he's actually a very good receiver. And we haven't seen what Mahomes can do with an actual sense of Tyreek Hill, like a competent outside receiver. And I think Marquise Brown could be that in addition to what he adds. But I understand why you want to take a shot on all three, because you get a chance to get Mahomes' number one receiver like in the 5th round or later. So going back to the Cowboys really quick to put a cap on what you're saying, um, everybody's drafting. Okay, here's the disconnect. CD Lamb's going number 1 or number 2. So everybody's drafting CD Lamb like he's going to do what he did after the week 7 bye last year. But Dak Prescott and Jake Ferguson are going, and Brandon Cooks are going more like as if their whole season stats represent what they're going to do this upcoming year. Dak Prescott obviously being the most attractive of that group, because Prescott was the number 2 fantasy quarterback
Mhm.
after the bye week, and number 1 was Josh Allen, who only got there by having 15 rushing touchdowns. And over that stretch too, I think there was a stretch in the second half of the year where he had like 8 rushing touchdowns in like 6 games. So that shows you how good Dak Prescott was producing. And I think absolutely there's buying opportunities in the Dallas passing game. What about the Dallas running game?
What running game? I
Well, it's
mean,
the thing, because it's like, oh, it's him, or is it none of the above?
I think it's going to be none of the above. I think the idea is early on in the season, Ezekiel Elliott's going to get a lot of work, mostly as a pass blocker, while they kind of usher in 2 rookie starters at left tackle and center. Keep Zeke on the field for the pass protecting. Let him do some of the goal line short yardage runs, and then I think Rico Dowdle will be the quote unquote starter. And then I think there's going to be some other running back in the fold that can give them some home run plays. I don't think that player's in the roster. I don't think it's Deuce Vaughn. It's not Royce Freeman. I think they're going to have to go out and either sign somebody, make a trade. The Cowboys have been really invested in these UFL players. So maybe somebody like Anthony McFarland, who's looked really,
Yeah,
really good in
yeah,
the UFL, can fill that role. I'm probably out on the Cowboys running backs, not only because of the talent, but also, I just think Mike McCarthy is going to go down swinging. They're going to throw
mm,
the ball a
yeah.
ton this year. And rather than trying to stay balanced or whatever they're going to try to do, I think this will be the year that Dak maybe averages 37, 38 passing attempts a game.
Yeah, that's your plan A, a quarterback, I think. And of course, it's almost like, Marcus, some really, really good football teams, some Super Bowl winning championship football teams have had as part of their spark genuine bad blood between the offense and defense, right? I mean, would
Mhm.
you agree? Like that's part of what made them go, was that the defense hated the offense. I mean, you can probably kind of figure it which of these teams we're talking about. And it wasn't playful. It wasn't like in good sport. It was like the defensive coordinator, I think, probably as part of his job would foment discord.
Mhm.
And it's almost like the best thing for Dallas, if you're a Cowboys fan and you want them to get over the hump this year, and it sounds like this might be happening, and you kind of described the scenario, is for the coaches to join the players in the insurrection against the front office, against the ownership, right? Because
Yes.
I think that the play, maybe this is just as a lifelong Steelers fan, that I felt like the Cowboys, ever since like the Tony Romo era, really have to operate against, in spite of their ownership. Like the players want to be good, and the players, it's like a players culture, but the ownership. I mean, what I'm getting at here right now is like, isn't it just exactly the design that when it's in the interest of the team, when it comes to wins, to set Dak Prescott up for a career year, it's also the year that you're saying we're not going to pay him, huh? How do those pieces fit together in any way?
I also don't think it's a coincidence that not only has Dak Prescott not gotten paid yet, I don't think CeeDee Lamb is in a rush to get a deal either, because he knows what the market is right now with Justin Jefferson. And
Mhm.
I think he knows what type of workload he's in for this year.
Right.
And if I mean, we already saw him have an unbelievable season last year. He just turned 25 years old. and he could get even more work than what he got last year. And if he has another similar season,
Right.
maybe we're not talking about him getting 35 million a year. Maybe it's 38. Maybe it's
Sure.
40.
40.
Uh,
Yeah.
and I think there's a belief among the players like, hey, let's ride this thing out.
Yeah.
Let's see how it goes. And then if we perform as well as we think we're going to, they're gonna have to pay us even more. So let's not give them any breaks now. Let's let the season play out and we'll go from there.
Yeah. It's in some ways it's classic contract year logic. Like
Mhm.
as a fan of the team, you want to harness that as something that will elevate your team because yeah, there's a lot more personally riding on that. And these players, and you want players that are willing to bet on themselves too, and that's great. I also wonder if CD is thinking, well, is Dak Prescott going to be? I mean, maybe Lamb and Prescott are talking to each other and saying, well, either we're both going to be here or we're both not going to be here. I don't know. There's always the franchise tag. It's a mess, but for fantasy, it's a good eating. So, since we're on Cowboys and brought up the Steelers, I'm going to do a detour here, and I kind of warned you we were going to talk about this. You were a teacher, right?
I was a social studies teacher, politics teacher for 5 years. Thank goodness I'm out of that now.
Yeah, because I'm wondering how you would teach the immaculate reception in your
Oh
class.
man.
I wonder how, and I get it. I mean, you're doing a lot of fun, cool stuff at 33rd team. A lot of cool. I mean, it's off season, but it's just still it's always fun that this is the whole like men can just sit around and say names of players. Um, but we jousted a little bit about the immaculate reception because you said, see, I thought you were going to say math teacher because this felt like a math teacher or economics teacher. Well, but the Steelers didn't even win the Super Bowl in the year of the immaculate reception, so it's not that important of a play. So this is like debate class. I'll
Yeah.
give you the podium and let you expound.
All right. So the purpose of the article, which you can check out at the 33rd team, that's a shameless plug, was the top 10 playoff moments of all time. So when I put together this list, I tried to pick playoff moments that had big significance in that season, right? Whether it's the James Harrison pick six that helped them win the Super Bowl, or it's the Malcolm Butler interception against the Seahawks, which did win them the Super Bowl.
Mm,
I tend to decide with plays that either happened in the Super Bowl or happened in a championship game. In the case with the Immaculate Reception, like there's no doubt the play itself is incredible. I mean, we really haven't seen that type of play happen again, like in a long time. So the play itself is really cool, but I think there's still a belief, maybe among maybe younger football fans, that believe that that was the play that helped them get to the Super Bowl and start the
hmm
dynasty of the '70s, and it did a little bit. But I think we have to remember that that was still a divisional round game. Pittsburgh went and played Miami in the championship game. They lost. Now it did help them get on track for the rest of the decade, but it's a really cool play that I'm not sure. I'm sure it's just a little tiny bit overrated, Sig, just a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know. See, I'm one of the people overrating it because as I said to you, that opened the portal. That was the moment that opened the portal. Like if that play doesn't happen, then maybe they don't win any Super Bowls. Just like if Scott Norwood makes that field goal,
Mm.
maybe the Bills win 3 Super Bowls. You know, that and it's an interesting if we're going to actually get into football theory, the proposition that the idea that plays can influence a team's destiny outside of the bounds of the season that they happen in, for sure. But it's okay. I mean, I'm not. We're not going to turn it to. See, I don't even watch those shows, so I don't know who's paired up with who.
Yeah.
Like, who are we role playing here? Who am I? Skip Bayless, is that one of the
No,
people?
no, you're
It,
much more level-headed. See, listen,
yeah,
I know part of it is my bias here, right? Because I am somebody who was born in Erie, PA, lived
right.
around Steeler fans my whole life. So every time I go to the airport and I see the statue of
Franco.
Franco, I think, it's just start mumbling underneath my breath. So I know a little bit of that is baked in there as well. So you can maybe move it up one or down two spots just based on that. But listen, I get it. I understand how one play can help you kind of get over the hump, and I think that certainly happened for Pittsburgh.
And in life too,
Yeah.
life-changing moments, right? We try to have those every week here on the couch. So it's fun though. I mean, I love. I mean, yeah, I would absolutely go back and watch reels of buzzer beaters from the NCAA tournament, or watch the. Oh my, Marcus, I have probably watched that James Harrison play at least 50 to 75 times in my life. It's just like a chaser for whatever's on your mind. These moments that seem like impossible, and or whenever Marc Andre Fleury made that save
Mm.
against the Red Wings. So wait, so you mentioned Steelers fans like almost like in the third person. You're not. You're from the Erie area, but you are not a Steelers fan.
I am not a Steelers fan. I grew up, my dad was a massive Cowboys fan,
Okay.
and the rest
Okay.
of my family's Steeler fans. So my dad growing up in the 70s with a bunch of Steeler fans, a little bit of hatred was, I think,
Oh
bred into
yes.
him. Yeah. So it's always been that natural rivalry between the Cowboys and Steelers. And it just so happens to be that they play early this year, which will always
Oh,
ignite the rivalry. So I'm,
is
I'm
that
excited. Week
wait,
5
so in Pittsburgh. It's in
in
Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh, Sunday
I've
Night
made it to
Football
I made it to one Steelers Cowboys game. It was Ben Roethlisberger's rookie year. It was when Bill Parcells was running the Cowboys. It was
against Vinny.
Vinny Testaverde, and the Steelers were down like 10 points in the fourth quarter, and there was a third and long, and they had just gotten a score to tighten it up within one score. And if Bill Belichick, whoever was calling plays for him, I don't remember at the time, in their infinite wisdom, called a pass, and they sacked Vinny, and he fumbled.
It was
And
Chemo Van Ohoffen, I think, that recovered it, right?
I mean, I don't know. It's so funny. What I remember is it was right before the election, and somebody in the same section as me had a sign that said Bush, Kerry, Roethlisberger with a check mark. And I do remember going to a road game as a Steelers fan. There's about 10,000 of us at the old barn in Irving that day. And just getting out of the car in the parking lot and seeing all the black and gold streaming from every direction. I mean, it made me tear up. I mean, it felt like, wow, we're here. Like talking to people in the stands, like they drove from Iowa, they drove from Arizona, just the Steelers coming to Dallas was like the closest they were going to be. And I remember Chris Sims, I think, was on the broadcast. They were talking about during the game. I was told how loud the Steelers fans were
Mhm.
and how we were louder than the Cowboys fans. And like, I'm just going to, I'm gonna. It's a wonderful thing, but I'm sure I might have probably told you. I don't know if I told you this. Did I tell you about my sister and the Cowboys?
No.
Because see, it's very similar to what you talk about. Because my sister was a rebel, and when we were growing up, she said she was a Cowboys fan, like just to rebel against everybody else. Like it was a way of saying, like I'm against you. I spit on what you hold sacred. So yeah, that Cowboys Steelers rivalry was more than a rivalry of teams or even cities. It was ways of life. You know.
And it's strange. We really don't have a lot of NFC AFC rivalries right now, but it seems like that Cowboys Steeler rivalry still holds up. We've had some really good games over the last couple
Hmm.
of decades, whether it was the Zeke touchdown
Hmm.
in 2016 or the Deshae Townsend pick six in 2008 or the 2004 game against Vinny and Ben's rookie
Hmm.
year. They haven't played a ton, but when they do play, it seems like we get really exciting
Oh
games.
yeah. Yeah, and in the 2016 game, I remember thinking, "Is this a Super Bowl preview? Like,
Mm.
can we see the fourth?" Because all of the Steelers Cowboys Super Bowls have been epic. I still argue that the Steelers Cowboys Super Bowls were the ones that vaulted us into the Super Bowl era, as far as the Super Bowl being the biggest event on the calendar. Period. Every year, it was the biggest event. I think the Steelers Cowboys Super. So there's yeah, all right. Enough Steelers. Uh, uh, Pittsburgh. Have you been watching the Pirates? It's
We've got a pitcher. Isn't this great?
two. Well, two, one and a
Yeah,
half,
too. Yeah.
two and a quarter. They can just get to the playoffs. My God.
They could find a
Okay.
bat or 2, that would be nice, but yeah.
Yeah,
Pirates are fun again.
trade. It is fun to be a pirate. I'm reading the Doc Ellis autobiography right now, which is fantastic to delve even deeper into my Pirates fandom. But we got to talk about football or something other than Pittsburgh. It's a Steelers show. We did the joke with Cecil's always. It's a Broncos
Mhm,
show. With me, it's a Steelers show. Let's stay in the NFC East really quick, because we talked about the Eagles and their new offense, and we talked a lot about the Cowboys, which was good because I think the bottom line is there's something there to exploit in fantasy football. Now, you mentioned something about Brandon Cook's second year in the offense, and I was getting around to making that point that I'm becoming more fascinated with offenses in their second year, like the Todd Monken Ravens
mhm.
offense. Now, granted, there's the dead cat bounce whenever there was incompetence or something holding back an offense. Like we were a little bit optimistic about Bill O'Brien last year, just because it can't be worse than Joe Judge and Matt Patricia. But it's that second year, right? Like you said, you're not thinking about it.
Mhm.
That is exciting. But sometimes that first year can really take the league by storm. And it was Washington. It was Washington 12 years ago, with Kyle Shanahan. And it was 11, 12 years ago. It all runs together. Robert Griffin III. And you wonder about Cliff Kingsbury and Jayden Daniels, and I say that, Marcus, because all we are hearing, and here's another form of OTA news, just listening to different players talking about something and they're saying the same thing. And what has been the drumbeat out of Washington? Tempo, tempo, tempo. And it makes sense. Cliff Kingsbury. And there's a question here about Cliff Kingsbury as a head coach and how things didn't work out with Kyler. And is Jayden Daniels even more ideal for Cliff than Kyler? Um, do you think this could be something like Robert Griffin III, which would be consequential for many levels? Do you think they can? Maybe we don't have to wait for year two to see what Cliff and Daniels can do together.
Yeah, I think so. I actually want to go to Dan Quinn for a second because
Sure.
generally, when you get a defensive minded head coach, what they want to do is basically turtle a little bit, lean on their
Mhm.
defense to win games, and just have the offense not screw up. I mean, look across the league. We have plenty of those coaches. That has historically not been Dan Quinn. What he wants his offense to do is to keep the pace up so that way his defense can play fast and they can play smaller players and that they can be really aggressive. And I think this works well with Cliff, who also wants to have a fast tempo. You have a quarterback in Jane Daniels who wants to play fast. You've got some really speedy receivers with Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson. I don't know how efficient this offense will be. I think that's the biggest key here. But yeah, I think this offense is going to play really fast, and I think Dan Quinn is going to allow the offense to have that tempo.
Yeah, I think that the other thing, if we look at divisional matchups, I would say that the way you would try to outflank a team like that, now we're getting into that back and forth, right? Is just a grinded out running game. But the Giants can't do that. The Cowboys can't do
Mhm.
that. The Eagles kind of can do that. Like we talked about, maybe that actually plays to Kellen Moore's strength a little bit when we get to some Philadelphia Washington games. But again, even if you're slowing down the tempo and you're grinding out drives and you're tiring out the opposing defense, because the problem is if you tire out the defense and then you go out and you run no huddle, and the defense has had like 2 or 3 minutes of real time on the
They're going to be
sideline.
gassed.
Oh
Yeah.
gosh, I mean, so you have to be careful with that, and that's how you can accomplish that. So we'll see. We'll see as we watch some NFC East showdowns. As again, we're learning things in OTAs. I guess not specific, but OTAs can have something to do with it because we're in that. OTAs are over now. We're kind of in the doldrums, but we're still thinking about everything we learned, and I think that especially from a fantasy football perspective, whether it's positive or negative, the profit, the winning is where because look, fantasy football is going to run like meteorology. Like most of it is going to assume the
Mhm.
weather's today is going to be like it was yesterday. Like whatever people did last year is what the ADP kind of runs to an extent on that. So it's knowing where the biggest changes are going to be, positive or negative. So when I say to you, Marcus, who's going to be different? Teams, units, players. What's somebody that stands out that you feel like you have a conviction at this point? When we see this, it's going to be different than the last time we saw it.
I kind of love this Bills offense this year. I know that there's a lot of concern about who's the number one pass catcher, but Sig, we saw last year when Joe Brady took over as the OC in Buffalo, they went back to a more balanced offense, and it really worked. I mean, it should have helped them beat the Chiefs if, uh, you know, if or if Josh Allen doesn't get a little too aggressive in the
Mm-hmm.
divisional round game. But I actually really like the weapons that they brought in. I think Curtis Samuel, who had his best year ever under Joe Brady in Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
I think he fits this offense well. I think Khalil Shakir is a really nice player. I wonder if Josh Allen is just going to be a better quarterback now that he can scan the field and look for the open target rather than, hey, I got to make sure Stephon Diggs gets his 8 or 9 targets a game to keep him happy. I got to keep him involved. Now he can just go out and play quarterback. And I think Allen has gotten to that point where he can do that as well as almost any other quarterback in the league. I'm pretty excited about this Buffalo offense. I was looking at some ADP this morning,
Yeah.
and I generally think most of the players on this offense are undervalued right now.
Well, again, I mean, I keep mentioning this. People can really see what my methodology is by how often I mention these things. Again, you can look at it was after the Denver game, the New England game,
The
whenever
Denver game.
after
Yep,
the
that's
Denver
the game
game,
Ken Dorsey got fired.
Dorsey got fired. again. And then there's a whole side conversation here about Ken Dorsey. Is he going to fix Deshaun Watson? But it's like, was he even that responsible for the success of Josh Allen in hindsight? But you set it up nicely so that, look, you can take a stance on Stephon Diggs one way or the other. You can take a stance on Josh Allen one way or the other. But if this Buffalo offense is even smoother, more efficient than it was under Brady last year, then you probably, as a hypothesis, should be holding on to, well, maybe Stephon Diggs, at least at that point in his career, was not a good influence on this offense. And certainly we saw his productivity nosedive. And you're right. From an ADP point of view, not Josh Allen, because you should never take Josh Allen. Just don't take the first
Mm.
quarterback. Just don't. And again, there's a chance that his stats from last year are a little bit of a fugazi, because 15 rushing touchdowns is a lot. I mean, that's asking a lot. And maybe he'll still remain the goal line running option like he was in the second half of the year last year. But even without the goal line touches, James Cook was a top 5 PPR running back once Brady took over last year. I have no idea why he's falling so far. Like in the 4th round, just,
Instant
don't take.
stash.
I think so. And then you have the wide receivers. And when you look at the Brady offense last year, uh, every week it was someone else's turn, basically, which is kind of what you want. I mean, from a team rooting standpoint, it tells me that, again, like you said, Josh Allen it's flexible. What's working? Which matchup is working? Which plays are working? He can just lean on what's working instead of having to have an artificial target share. And they took turns last year. Uh, and you're looking this year at Coleman, and then Samuel's going maybe like 2. So Coleman's going like in the 6th round, Samuel 9th round, Shakir 10th round. And I feel like Shakir's the layup there out of those 3, because he's the one, as has been pointed out by many Buffalo Bears. There's one wide receiver who has caught a pass from Josh Allen on the roster. What? That's
And if
him.
you look at Khalil Shakir's profile, at least coming out of Boise State, I mean, he's the exact same size, same weight, and runs the exact same 40 as Stephon Diggs. Now, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying he's Diggs, but could he be the player that maybe plays more on the outside this year than we saw last year, where he
Right.
was basically a slot receiver? If that's the case, I mean, he's going to be a massive value in the double digit rounds if he
Yep.
becomes an every down receiver. Plus, anytime they've given him opportunities, he's produced, whether it's in the playoffs
Mm-hmm.
against your Steelers. I don't mean to bring that up again, but I
Uh,
will. He has seemed to make big play after big play for this offense. He's clearly going to be the receiver that Josh Allen trusts the most, at least early in the season. And if he's able to have success, I could see that role continuing to grow for him.
Yeah, I think that, and that's easy. I mean, there's these fantasy football truisms. When there's uncertainty, just go with the cheapest option.
Mhm.
Or when you spread out your shares in your portfolio. Let's mention Dalton Kincaid, because Kincaid's he did see. Now it's hard to separate the stuff out, right? Because Dawson Knox got hurt in the middle of the season. Dalton Kincaid was just a rookie, so you would expect him to scale up and do more as the season goes on. There's always the possibility for Kincaid of a big second year leap, but also I think it was Dane Brugler who said he was the best receiver in his draft class, period. Like, not tight end, the best receiver. And boy, that sounds like somebody, when your pass offense is in flux, that's going to be a big part of what you do. Dalton Kincaid is up there, a somewhat aspirational ADP, where he's pretty much in that top 5 tier with Kelsey and Andrews and McBride and Laporta. But we could be 3 or 4 weeks into the season and say he should have been number 1. We also could say, hey, maybe we got a little ahead of ourselves. He's taking turns like everybody else in this offense. Where do you fall on that thermometer?
I'm glad that you brought up Dalton Kincaid because he is the number one player that I've been targeting in all my drafts this year.
Ooh.
If you look at the second half of the last year, he basically put up the same numbers as Sam Laporta. The only difference was the touchdowns, and we know that touchdowns can be a little bit fluky, especially at a small sample size. But even if you go back to when the Bills drafted him, he did nothing prior to the draft because he was dealing with a back injury. He missed a lot of the OTAs and mini camps. And then, yes, the Dawson Knox injury happened, which opened up more snaps. But I kind of think that was going to happen anyway as he was getting healthier as the season went on. Now he's fully healthy going into year 2. Year 2 is when we generally see these big breakouts at the tight end position. I just think there's a good chance that he leads this team in targets. and that Joe Brady starts to design this offense to look a little bit more like their conference rivals in the Chiefs and run the offense through Dalton Kincaid and let everybody else be complementary players. I just don't see that big of a difference between Kincaid's talent and the other four names that are going ahead of him. So just give me
Yeah.
Kincaid, who's the cheapest option of the group.
Right. Usually. Yeah. I mean, it is one that could absolutely, it could work out big time. And I am, from a fantasy football strategy standpoint, I'm like, just take whoever's the fourth or fifth one. And
Mhm.
like you said, Kincaid often is the fourth or fifth tight end off the board. And it is exciting. I think what I saw, I can't remember who it was, Marcus, but they were asking the Bills players about Joe Brady's offense, and somebody said everybody eats. Everybody eats. So, and they like that. I mean, it seems like all the players are super positive about it. And like you mentioned, Curtis Samuel had one of his best years with Joe Brady. And Joe Brady links us all the way back to Joe Burrow at the very beginning.
Mhm.
Of course, Joe Brady, one of the authors, along with Joe Burrow, of the best offensive college football season of all time. Yeah, you think that's
Yeah.
fair?
Oh,
I think
absolutely. I don't know how it's ever going to get rivaled. You put up 60 points in a championship game. You have maybe the best wide receiver duo of all time with Justin
right.
Jefferson and Jamar Chase. Yeah, it's to me it's pretty easy.
Yeah, and we'll see. Is Joe Brady riding like Adam Gase way? Is he still riding on the coattails of that? Again, a conversation that came up earlier in this hour. Like, how much of it is the play caller, designer? How much of it is just the quarterback? We get to answer all these questions when the season starts, and we get to take our stances through our fantasy leagues, and we get to learn by reading what Marcus writes and listening to Marcus and all these other great people we have coming through on the couch. So it's almost time for summer break, and I ask this on the couch a lot because there's more to life to football. So summer break, are you taking a summer break, or like you're relaxing? You headed to Cedar Point, you getting out up in the outer, I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in driving distance from Erie.
Kennywood? Yeah.
Kennywood,
Uh
yeah.
no, not really. I was thinking about this today actually. I used to be, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, I used to be a social studies teacher. And by the time I got to May and June, I was just burnt out. I needed a
Mhm.
vacation just to kind of reset my body and reset my brain. But when it comes to talking and writing about football, this is fun. Like
Oh, wow.
this is what wakes you up in the morning. I'm so
Mhm.
excited to jump on Twitter and see what the news is of the day. So in some ways, and I know this sounds cheesy or whatever, but this is my vacation. This
Yeah.
is my break. Is just getting to do this for a living. So I've been with little trips, with the family. I've got a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old now, so they'll keep me
Ooh,
busy.
enjoy
But
it.
yeah, well, listen, it's the 3-year-old's fun. My daughter's getting into football cards now, which is an
Oh,
amazing experience. It's so
wow.
much fun.
That's great. This is your retirement plan. No, it's great. I
Well,
see
that's what we all
sometimes.
thought when we were kids, that all of our cards were going to make us super rich, and it never ended up being
Right.
the case.
Well, it didn't. And, one of the original iterations of me was I was like a sports card shark dealer.
Mhm.
Like I would buy rookie cards. This is when I was in high school. I would buy rookie cards in like lots of 50 and 100. I think my best hit ever was buying Juan Gonzalez upper deck rookie cards. I bought a lot of 50 back when they were like 60 cents a pop or something like that. I used to go to the card shows and turn whatever I brought into more. That was fun for me, but it was a little bit I became a bit obsessive
Well, say I went to
about
my
it.
first ever card show last week with a friend of ours, Matt Williamson, actually.
Oh, yeah.
And it was so much fun. I felt like a little kid again. I had my
Oh,
my little
yeah.
case of cards and just going up and looking at all the vendors and trading and selling. It was a blast. I hope everybody out there can have some kind of hobby that can bring that kind of joy to your life because I'm so glad that I got back into it.
I mean, it's fun for, I'll confess, like, what I get obsessive, I have an addictive personality. I don't wanna spend any money because the chase cards thing, I'm afraid, because the dopamine hit when you see, like, the
Mm,
thick card and you get, oh my gosh, and then the one time you actually get the one of one Joe Burrow or whatever, well, now you're just gonna spend thousands of dollars chasing something like
mm.
that again. So I just do the app, the Top Spunt app, which is fun. I mean, I feel like I could give them like a 50-page feedback list of all the things I think are great and all the things I would change as an old time card collector. But I like it, especially the Bowman set, because it just gives me reasons to like look up players and learn more about them.
I,
It just
I
it just it's like fantasy football.
I was gonna say my daughter's favorite part, and she's really young. She's just getting into it, but she
Sure.
loves reading the back of the cards, and she loves having me
Yeah.
read them and like tell the little stories. And she doesn't understand the stats or anything like that, but to her, it's a new little short story every time that we get a card, which is
Yeah.
fun. This is why that trading cards were made, so we can learn more about
Yeah.
these players.
It's our heroes, you
Hmm.
know. It's characters that inhabit a different plane that we get to watch and kind of experience through observing it, but we can't actually be on that plane with them. It's part of the reason we like it. No, sports cards are, it's just all different ways of expressing our love of sports, and allowing it to, at the very least, be a solve or something that soothes the things, if not being lucky like us, Marcus, and being like
Yes.
what you do. But let's go back to teaching. And I think I said this week, teachers are heroes. Teachers are heroes. Teachers are holding together the fabric of society. And then oftentimes eh, they're giving impossible jobs. No wonder that y'all are always burnt out. You're giving impossible jobs. They're spending their own money in a lot of cases. They're spending their own time outside of work in a lot of cases. And because they care about kids. It's amazing, all the people down here in New Orleans, that like that's the biggest thing, is they just care about kids, and they care about giving what they have, passing on what they have to kids. Um, and I and it's Teachers are so important, so much more important than we treat them.
Yes.
Um, that all being said, tell me stuff that you learned, something you learned as a teacher. It can be something about human nature, it can be something about dealing with the hierarchy and the whole organizational structure of a school, it could be dealing with parents, it could be just offhand moments that happen in the classroom, right? Tell me something you've learned from your years of being a teacher that you're going to take with you.
So I was very fortunate that I got to teach at a school with hundreds of international students. So to learn about their cultures
Oh,
and what they're coming from, and for most of these students, like English was their second language. So
oh
to try
wow.
to teach students where they're still learning the English and trying to teach government and politics and social studies was a challenge, but it was also amazing. To learn how some of these kids have had to persevere to even get to this spot. It was a very challenging job, but my gosh, was it rewarding. But um, you do get burnt out, and that's one of the things that I really appreciate about all the teachers out there. My wife is a teacher. I don't know how she can continue to do it year after year without taking a break, because it is so emotionally taxing. Um, it's admiring. It really is.
Yeah, well, they're more patient with our kids than we are.
Hmm.
You know, they're delving into reservoirs of patience and compassion and love. And the good teachers, it's love. I mean, it's loving the kids. It's caring about the kids. Sometimes I see the teachers like at the end of the year, like they're emotional because they're almost like, I'm
They're
not
going to
going to
miss
get
their
to
kids. They
see you.
love it.
Yeah.
They end up becoming their kids.
Yeah, and it's, oh gosh, I mean, it's one of the glues of our society right now. It's like holding our
Mhm.
society together, teachers. And is there anything? And I want to touch on what you said too about teaching kids where English is their second language. It probably makes you a better teacher. I mean, makes you have to really have a different way of approaching your. You can't just rely on old crutches of
Right.
language and things and just reading it right out of the book. You have to actually be able to explain your subject in a way, in a different. Like, go ahead.
Yeah, you just have to be very clear and concise and kind of
Right.
cut out all the stuff that doesn't matter. Because if you try to fill in with jokes and stories or whatever,
Hmm.
it just clouds everything. So it's
Hmm.
but you also have to make it entertaining, which is a very tricky balance, right? Again, I think as I'd go back to like my first and second year as a teacher, I'm sure I was a horrible teacher. I apologize to all the students that I had early on, but it really is tricky. But also, you see how much these kids who want to learn and how much they grew. Like in 9 months, it's incredible.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. I mean, it really is. This is where I can do my evangelical thing about Waldorf education, but that I'll leave that for a different show, a whole different podcast series. I'll wind it up on this, then we'll circle back to teachers. Um, and I'll give you something to think about it. Because you think about it, I have to think that every single one of us has at least one teacher that we say like, I wouldn't be the person I am today if I hadn't had this teacher in my life. Like I'm thinking of Mrs. Semenko, who taught the psychology. We actually had psychology. Bentleyville didn't have Bentworth High School. We didn't have AP classes, but we had great teachers who like taught physics and psychology and things like that. Mr. Lloyd taught physics. He was terrific. They filmed um, Silence of the Lambs, Buffalo Bill's house in Silence of the Lambs, like the outside of it
Really?
was his house. Yeah. He said, never, ever, ever let them film a movie in your house. Never. Anyway, he told us salacious stories about Jodie Foster, but I'm not going to. We're not here to rumor monger. We're here to distribute teachers. So Bentworth, I had so many teachers, especially in high school, that um, just spent the time to help foster like that curiosity and excitement of discovery of the world as it was opening up to me at that age and being stimulated by everything. So when I say to you, like a teacher that helped make you the person you are today, who comes to mind?
Yeah, I've my seventh grade social studies teacher, David Bone. I'm going to mention him on the spot because I know I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now without him. When I was a seventh grader, you're awkward as a seventh grader. You don't know
Yes.
what you're doing. Uh, and he pretty quickly saw that I have a love for football, and he would go out and rent books, or he would buy football books
Oh
for me to read.
wow.
He would bring in newspapers so I could look at the box scores, because this not pre-internet but early stages of internet. So he would bring in
Sure.
newspapers so I could see what was going on during my lunch breaks. He would let me come in and watch some football film on his computer. Like,
Wow.
went way above and beyond what any teacher would ever need to do for some seventh grade student. But he really ignited my love for football. Still calls me every couple of weeks to see how I'm doing.
Oh yeah.
Turned into a great
Oh
lifelong friend.
wow. It's a great story too. Let me tell you the story of how my social studies teacher helped influence me to not be a social studies teacher and instead be a football talker. It's good. You
Exactly.
did good. You did good, Mr. Bonham. You did good. And you all are doing so good for all of us. So it gives us the opportunity to get to do this and call it work and share in our love of football and our love
Mhm.
of everything that stimulates us. So, folks, we love you so much. I have one more couch next week. Coach Peak Index. Greg's going to be on. That's we're going to do one more bow on the off season. And then I'm going to take a few weeks off, head out to California, and we'll be back with the preseason watch list when camps are opening up, and then it's on. But it's always on because of the love of the game with Marcus Mosher. 3013 and a lot of other great places. We love serving you all because you are so classy.